So much time is spent perfecting origin stories, when the stories that build trust, the ones that create real connection, are the ones that talk about what happens after the origin story. This is Stories Build Businesses, the show that proves your story isn't just something to tell, it's the strategy that builds a business that's uncopyable, unforgettable, and unmistakably you. I'm your host, Megan Wright, story and strategy coach, and today we're exploring why the story of how you began is only one chapter, and why the stories you tell after that moment often matter even more. Because yes, your origin story does create context, but the small present day stories that you're living now are the ones that are going to shape how people understand your work. So often when people think of storytelling in business, they picture one thing. The big cinematic version of how it all began. The hero's journey, the job you left, the moment everything clicked, the day you decided that something had to change. Those stories are meaningful. They let your audience understand your starting point. But here's the thing. If all your storytelling lives inside that single polished moment, everything else starts to flatten. You end up repeating the same few sentences on every podcast, panel, or get to know me post. And eventually it stops feeling like a story and starts feeling like a script. And more importantly, it can create distance between you and the very people that you're trying to reach. Because your audience doesn't want to just know what pushed you into your business. They want to understand what keeps you in it. They want to see how your values show up in your daily choices, how your thinking evolves, what you're learning as you build and rebuild and refine. Those smaller stories sit closer to where they are right now. So today I want to explore what happens when you stop relying on that one origin story and instead start telling the hundreds of smaller, purpose-driven stories that reveal who you really are. For the longest time, I thought I would never be someone who actually ran a business. Even though every time I was frustrated in my 9 to 5, I would say to myself, one day I'm going to have to work for myself because no one else is ever going to give me the freedom or creativity that I want to have. And I meant it. But if I'm honest, I didn't really believe it. I'm not a risk taker. My entire life had been built on following the safe, sensible path. I'd got good grades, gone to university, got a stable job. I'm a perfectionist at heart, and that means that trying something new, trying something that I might not do perfectly, can feel really scary to me. So even though this dream sat quietly in the background and was always there in the back of my mind, I never actually thought I'd make the jump. But then life did what life does. It handed me a set of circumstances that I never would have chosen. My work environment became harder and harder to stay in. It was chipping away at who I was, making me doubt myself and shrink myself. And eventually, staying became something I just couldn't do with any self-respect. For the sake of myself and my mental health, I had to walk away. And it left big scars on my confidence, on my self-trust, on the way I saw myself. So when I started my business, the very last thing I wanted to do was relive that and tell it as some kind of origin story about why I began or why I left. It was too raw and it was too personal. And I wanted to keep a boundary. I had just left a toxic environment, and there was no part of me that wanted to drag that negative energy into something new I was building. Starting this business was my happy place, and I didn't want to drag old memories that I was trying to put in the past into the thing that I was building in the present. So I didn't tell that story at all. In fact, I think this is probably the first time I've ever told it. And because I didn't want to use that story, I had to find alternatives. So while everyone else was posting their why I started narratives or the why behind their business, I started exploring lots of different whys, the different angles, the different stories, all about how I work, why I choose the methods I choose, why I've designed my frameworks the way I have, why certain moments matter to me, why I create the offers that I do. And what surprised me was this. I wasn't disadvantaged by not telling the big emotional origin story. If anything, I think it helped me to stand out. I wasn't following the same framework. I wasn't recreating the hero's journey. I wasn't pulling people through a cliched story arc that they'd heard 100 times before. And so, in a strange way, I'm grateful that I didn't tell that origin story early on, because being unwilling to share it forced me to tell my story differently. And that difference became the thing that made people lean in. So here's the shift I want to offer. Your origin story isn't the whole of your purpose. Purpose isn't just one moment. It's the accumulation of many different moments. I talk about 5 different types of stories that help you build your business. And one of those is purpose stories. But most people cling to just one purpose story, the why they started one. And they assume it's the only one that counts or matters. But it's not the only one. Purpose stories can also include why you work the way you do, why certain values guide your decisions, why you created a certain offer. Those are purpose stories too. But because they're quieter, people underestimate how powerful they are. People often treat the moment they began as if it's the only story that matters. But in reality, your business is shaped far more by the stories that you're living right now and the decisions you're making day to day. And that's what your audience actually connects with. People don't build trust because of the moment you started. They build trust because of why you keep showing up consistently long after that moment. The challenge in all of this is it's easier to polish one big story than to stay present and notice the moments that matter in the ones that you're still in. It's easier to rehearse the cinematic beginning than to share the small, honest whys, which are happening in real time. And the small whys, the one that often people think are too ordinary, are often the ones that people connect to most deeply. Because they reveal who you are now, not who you were before everything changed. Businesses that last aren't built on one dramatic why. They're built on a consistent, evolving purpose, which is told gently and often. So instead of asking yourself, what's my origin story? Try asking, why am I doing what I'm doing today? What choices am I making in my business? What why is unfolding right now? Because those stories count more than you think, and they shape your message far more than you realize. Because when you share the purpose stories you're actually living, not just the one that started it all, you let people into your world. You let them understand who you are and why you work the way you do. You show them what makes you different. And most importantly, you're not showing them a version of you from the past that made a decision. You're showing them the version of who you are today, because that's the version of you that they want to get to know. That's the version of you that they would get to work with when they step into your offers. So that's the person that they need to be seeing more of. If this episode resonated, come and tell me over on Instagram at Stories Build Businesses, and make sure to share it with somebody else who'd love it. See you next time. Bye.